fascinating exhibition. We're delighted to have Sinead McCoole start by giving her lecture or talk, and I will take it from there and give it to Sinead.
Oh, thank you. Hello everybody. We're very welcome everyone to meet with Mick, and I'm really privileged to have been asked to do this. I suppose it's slightly daunting because of his reputation, and also just for me to look again at this work. I wanted to sort of show this to you. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's the work by Jack Butler Yeats that was produced in 1912 in this very spot. We were just talking about it earlier, and it probably may have been exactly where we are, because the road seems to slope in that direction. And the reason I wanted to show it to you is that it may or may not be a real event of three boys here on the street showing and discussing a Japanese toy. I believe that it's probably a real event, partly because it's sort of so unusual, and the reason that it may be the fact that here in Ballycastle in County Mayo over 100 years ago that a Japanese toy would have come into the possession of these children would be because people would have obviously been sailing around the world, and one of the things that we know about people is that their lives are far more complicated and complex than maybe our history books have told us in the past. But the reason that I wanted to sort of start off and talk about this at the outset is that when every single time since I know of this piece that I've come to this place, it brings it to my mind. So if you don't know it, it's not something that you're going to think about. And the reason that I wanted to say that was because when I come to see these images of these people, I know them really well. I spent nearly 25 years studying them in some shape or form. And for me, I know their ages, I know the details, I know the source material where Mick would have looked at and got the images. In fact, behind you there in the corner, in the far corner, if you could look there, I actually was responsible for bringing that photograph in public ownership. In the 90s, I visited the Mallon family, and I often felt guilty afterwards that I had to ask them for that photograph to put into Kilmainham jail, because it's Michael Mallon in his British Army uniform, and I know that Mick selected it from the images of him on purpose, as him as the drummer boy, having been converted through, we know from his letters, to the way of seeing the evils of British imperialism and the British Army, having served in India as one of their number and then converted to Irish nationalism and coming through the labour movement also. But the reason that I can talk a little bit about that is that it had lasted and remained in the family drawer until the 1990s. And one of the reasons that it did was because obviously it's him in his British Army uniform. And one of my first ever times that I was on the television, and I learned that particular day about it, about how you can start a sentence and finish a sentence, but they can cut it so that you say one thing and it's not quite what you intended to say. And of course, I said on the 9 o'clock news that most people wouldn't be aware that Michael Mallon was in the British Army, and the rest of it, which explained his conversion, didn't come into it, and it upset his family. While it's the truth, and this comes back to Mick's exhibition, while it's the truth, our memory is only informed by what we know. And one of the things that's particularly wonderful about this catalogue is that it contains in it the copybooks that Mick produced himself in 1970-71, if I'm remembering the date correctly, in school. Now, I have to say, I would give him an A+ if I was his teacher, even today. And he actually probably missed the boat, because he could also have been a graphic novelist and graphic cartoons, and he know his influence was comics at the time. But the standard of his work at that young age must have taken his teachers by complete surprise, and they must have really enjoyed looking at his work, because not only are they accurate, I particularly like the fact that, unlike most people, even in the media today, he correctly calls him Pádraig Mac Piarais here. He doesn't use the Pádraig Pierce, mixing the English and the Irish, which of course an Irish speaker wouldn't use, and so his accuracy is there. I do think it's quite funny that he makes them have expressions in a way that he doesn't with his more mature work. His own work is probably more along the lines of maybe an immediate reaction. I think his his Connolly here is much more benign, and he almost smiles as he does in that photograph. In his cartoon version in his school book, he's quite different. And what I think is really important here is that Mick represents somebody slightly older than me, but not much, and in that person that was brought up through having their history given to them by an enthusiastic teacher, as I would suspect, his actual visualization and his content, which I read, was very much accurate to what happened. But in '66 and in the period that followed, the whole idea was, it was to tell a narrative. The whole idea was there were the signatories, as we've continued on in the decade of centenaries. And then it was about the rising and what happened. What's happened in this centenary has been that we've made it more complicated. If I ever have to write anything on the rising, I have to go back to the primary school history book, because I think, how can you write that in 5 or 6 sentences? And so you go back to a primary school history book and you really say, oh, that's how you do it. So you forget about this and you don't think about that and you don't think about the other. And I think what's really interesting about this exhibition, even though it's been split in two, and I think that if any of you plan just to have one part of it, and not that I'm talking twice, it's more that I think that to see it as a collective is very important, because it also has some more of the complexity of what the story is. So what you have in this room is iconography, but iconography with a difference. It's very much of 2016, and that is that in each case he's included the personalities of the men, and that's one of the things that we find now. The idea of the image, even though it's the standard images in some ways of these men, the inclusion of sort of the details that only he can do in terms of his skill and style. And I think one of the things that you have to remember as well is that because it's 100 years ago, you don't really, you have that idea that something becomes historic and it becomes dry and it becomes sort of remote. But I think it's your use of colour, your framing, the way that you printed their names. It really has a feeling of the moment, and yet at the same time, it keeps the integrity. I think it was really interesting that Mick included Eamon de Valera, and I asked him about that. And so if you look around the room, and I had come up with something different than you had, and that is that every single person, you had said it was to do with death, he's the only person in the room that didn't actually die for Ireland. Because in 1927, when the Countess died of complications of appendicitis, many people concluded that it was her 5 periods of imprisonment that actually brought about her premature death. So she actually ends up in this group of people that all died for Ireland, with the exception of Eamon de Valera. So then you told me the personalised element, that you actually met the man. So in the same way that I have the kinship to Michael Mallon and Thomas Clark, because I met their children, I think you had the same way to Eamon de Valera, and of course the link into County Clare. And of course he's such an icon within that group. He's one of the 150 people who were executed, to be executed at the time. And when I worked in Kilmainham Jail in the 90s, we worked with Maureen Cashman, who used to spend most of her time doing something like this, rushing her way through it, and she was the last of voluntary workers, and she used to be very, very clipped with her Irish history. And I had come out of college, so I used to think, oh, she didn't go into detail there, and she didn't say this, and she didn't say that. But I was so taken aback when I realised that she was somebody whose father had been on the execution list, and she wouldn't have been there unless he hadn't been executed, because she was obviously born after that time. So for me, it was the idea that she had a personal connection to this place that I, of course, didn't have. I'd only learned of it in history books. And one of the things I feel is really important to remember is art is to bring people in. It's the way to pull you in. So the poetry and the drama and the community work and the exhibitions and the catalogues that have come out this year. And I mean, I know in my own family, it's like, is 1916 not over yet? Is it, are we still going? And the idea is this idea is that, as I've spoken to people lately and said, we've lived in a time of celebrity. And as a result of the children having had the army officers coming to their schools, giving them the flag, talking to them about the importance and venerating the flag again, which of course they don't know is all about reclamation because of our history, but that interest that's been sparked has meant that I've ended up on the radio or in different places doing something because it's the 5 or 6-year-old or 7-year-old who's come and talked to his mother who's in the media, who's ended up having to go and look up history books or go on the net and Google information. And so they've come and they've wanted to talk again. So it's been great for me to have that interest in what I'm interested in. So when Sean asked me to come and open this, like, I didn't even have to pause for breath because, one, I knew who Mick was, knew the quality of the work, and I also felt, wow, this is yet another opportunity to talk to people about what I feel passionate about. And I know that he wants to keep this together as a set of images, and I think that it would be really important that it does end up in some public collection, because honestly, through the years, we know a lot from the National Gallery, but also from the Hugh Lane. They've always put historic paintings into the basement and really had great difficulty with those images of our history. Now, when I talk later on, I'm going to talk about it in a completely different way. So if you're going to come to the second half, I want you to imprint in your memory the information that you've got here, and then visualize it in the context of the other, because it's important to have both sides of this exhibition, because the next piece is going to push you and push your boundaries. So thank you very much.
I asked Mick earlier, will he say a few words, and reluctantly he's agreed. So.
I'd like to thank Sinead very much for the words. I want to thank everybody for taking the trouble to come on this lovely summer's July evening in Ireland. And I know it was pretty painless, no need for wipers or anything like that in the car. Such beautiful weather, which some people have heard is my brother John says that the rain in Spain falls mainly in Ireland. It was a good example of that this evening. I'd like to thank everybody concerned with the Ballinglen Arts Foundation, which has been a fantastic resource and a way of introducing so many artists to North Mayo, including myself and Pat Harris and many others, and Amelia Steen, who's here. To the extent that in this year's annual RHA exhibition, virtually all the landscapes in it, all very good landscapes if I may say so, are all from North Mayo. So there's a whole kind of phenomenon. Ballinglen and Ballycastle are now very much associated with the arts in Ireland and the visual arts in particular. I'd like to thank Patrick Murphy from the RHA who commissioned this particular exhibition, and Ron who hung it, Una and Chrissy here who are unbelievable, everyone from the Art Centre as well in Ballina, Sean who's here, Sean Walsh, and again, just thank you all for coming, and hope that some of you might be able to make it to the next instalment, which is in Ballina. I feel like I must be a real artist now, like 2 openings in the one. And of course, great value for the limited edition contract, where you get the full inside story. Thanks very much.
Our founding director here this evening as well, and I think it's just so lovely if we have a few words from her. Yay!
Well, I think my job this evening is to, first of all, welcome you all here, but you've obviously been welcomed quite well already. And I just want to say that this exhibition, sorry, I've been talking to too many people in a loud room, is the example, the living example of exactly what Peter and I thought could happen here when we started, before anything like this was happening anywhere in the Northwest, much less here. West of the Shannon, basically, was not happening. And here it is. And you all are here helping it be the most living, breathing reality, along with Mick's extraordinary work, which Peter and I have known since 1998 and very much have admired, along with so many other people. But this place has become a hotbed of community activity, of an event such as tonight's, which crosses all the boundaries in terms of high art to community and participation, and it's everything that we knew could happen. And it has. So here's to us all.